Is there a reason you're blocking the aisle, old man? The voice wasn't loud at first, but it carried. Sharp, rigid, coded in the kind of tone that didn't ask for an answer so much as expect an apology. Colonel Nathan Korr stood stiffly at the edge of aisle 9 in the Fort Varnen Base Exchange, arms folded, expression hard. His crisp desert-issue uniform still had creases from the dry cleaner. His combat boots, barely scuffed, gleamed unnaturally under the fluorescent lights. The man was clean-cut and new promoted, his silver eagle rank glinting like a badge of entitlement. He wasn't here to shop. He was here to be seen. At the end of the aisle, a man in his late 70s, slow-moving, slightly hunched, held a can of barley soup in weathered fingers. His cap read Ridgeborne Division, retired, the stitching faded, the bill curved from decades of wear. His back was turned, and for a moment he didn't respond. He wasn't ignoring anyone. He was just reading. Colonel Korr took a step closer, irritation rising. You hear me? This isn't a library. People have places to be. The old man finally turned. His movements were deliberate, not weak, just unrushed. His name, though Korr hadn't bothered to ask, was Elias Murrin. And while his body moved with the stiffness of age, his eyes were something else entirely. Clear, still, watchful. They didn't dart nervously. They held. They studied. But they made no attempt to match Korr's hostility. My apologies, Colonel, Elias said calmly, placing the can back with a soft metallic clink. Didn't mean to cause a delay. There was no sarcasm in his voice. No muckety. Just quiet, patient sincerity. But that only made Korr bristle further. Something about the old man's calmness, his unshaken posture, was offensive. It didn't fit the script Korr had written in his head, where the elderly veteran should have muttered an apology, moved aside quickly, maybe even saluted for good measure. But Elias just stood there, like a boulder in a river. You have a reason to be here, Korr asked, folding his arms tighter. This exchange is for active duty independence, not for wanderers. There was a silence behind that last word. A blade sharpened just enough to cut without drawing blood. Shoppers nearby paused mid-step. A young corporal pushing a stroller slowed as she glanced toward the tension. A couple of privates with gym bags lingered by the refrigerated section, pretending to study energy drinks. Elias adjusted his cap slightly. The motion was small, but something in it carried weight, not defiance, not fear. Just memory. I've got a valid base pass, he said, voice low and even. I came for soup. Been coming here since before most shelves had barcodes. Colonel Korr narrowed his eyes. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not from someone who looked like he could barely lift a duffel bag. He had risen fast in rank, impressing all the right people with his punctuality, his sharpness, his intolerance for disorder. And now, standing before him, was what he believed to be a relic, a vestige of a slower, softer era. A man who had no place here, at least not anymore. Well, maybe it's time to stop coming, Korr said. You're holding up the aisle over a can of soup like it's a life-or-death decision. I take my sodium levels seriously, Elias replied, almost amused. Then he nodded polite. But I'll be on my way. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He didn't huff or argue. But he also didn't look away. As he turned his cart slowly, arthritis evident in the way his fingers gripped the handle, Korr stepped to block him. No, the colonel said, raising his voice now. We're not finished. A faint ripple spread through the aisle. The corporal with the stroller stopped fully now, her brow furrowed. One of the privates slowly took out his phone. Nobody intervened, not yet, but the energy shifted. A confrontation was blooming in a place meant for silence and groceries. And Elias, the man accused of standing still too long, stood even stiller. Elias Murrin didn't flinch. That was the first thing people noticed. Most men his age would have backed away, muttered another apology, or tried to end the confrontation as quickly as possible. But Elias simply paused, steadying his breath, and looked at Colonel Nathan Korr with a quiet patience that felt strangely out of place. Not stubborn, not confrontational, just contained, like a lake with a storm happening beneath the surface, but no wave daring to rise. I'm not looking for trouble, Colonel, Elias said, his voice low, smooth, weathered by years rather than fear. Just a can of soup. That's all. The way he spoke carried something unnameable, a softness that held strength, not weakness. But Nathan Korr didn't hear the strength. He heard defiance. And defiance, in his mind, was disrespect. Oh, is that it? Nathan stepped closer, invading the old man's personal space under the harsh white lights of aisle 9. You're just here for soup, but you think you can stand here like you own the place. Elias raised an eyebrow, subtly, as if confused by the logic. I'm not standing like I own anything, he replied, tone unshaken. Just reading a label. Nathan scoffed loudly, enough for 2 sailors behind them to exchange glances. A label? For 5 minutes? You're clogging up the aisle. People have duties. Schedules. You don't get to wander around here like this is your backyard. He jabbed a finger toward the veteran cap. And wearing that doesn't give you special privileges. Elias's hand rose slowly, not in defense, but to gently pinch the bill of his cap between 2 fingers. He adjusted it, smoothing the faded fabric. Not proudly, not defensively, almost reverently, as though the cloth itself carried memories. This cap doesn't give me privileges, Elias murmured. Just history. Nathan let out a short, mocking laugh. History? I'll bet your history was sorting mail or pushing inventory on some dock decades ago. Maybe stirring soup on a ship's galley. Something real heroic. A few heads turned sharply at that. Not many dared react, but the disrespect was loud enough that even those pretending not to notice felt the sting. Still, Elias didn't rise to the bait. He didn't scowl, didn't tremble, didn't retort. He simply breathed in slowly and exhaled, a quiet sigh that carried years of understanding and years of restraint. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans, the leather of his old wallet creaking softly as he opened it. He removed a slightly worn but clean government-issued veteran ID card and offered it with steady fingers. Here, if you'd like to see it. Nathan snatched it as if grabbing contraband. He studied it with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it close to his face, then far, then close again. He tilted it toward the ceiling light as if checking for holograms, as if hunting for a reason, any reason, to escalate. But everything was valid. Elias Murrin. Honorable discharge. Access approved. Nathan flicked the card back toward Elias with a flick of his fingers, sending it spinning awkwardly before the old man caught it gently. Fine. It checks out, Nathan said. Means you're technically allowed here. Doesn't mean you should be. The last sentence hung in the air like smoke. Elias tucked the card away carefully. No irritation showed on his face. Only that same quiet stillness, deeper now, heavier, like the calm before a storm chooses whether to break. Young man, Elias said softly, I'm not here to cause anyone discomfort. Then leave, Nathan snapped. It wasn't just an order. It was a summary judgment. A sentence passed without trial. The tone said, I don't care who you were. I don't care what you did. I only care that right now, I outrank you. Elias didn't move. Not stubbornly, just calmly, deliberately, like a man who had stood in harder places, under harder voices, and learned long ago that raising his own voice wasn't necessary to remain unbroken. The sailors nearby felt it first, a shift, a tension, something unseen rising like heat from desert sand. The disrespect had crossed a line. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Nathan Korr, blinded by rank and ego, didn't feel that shift at all. He only saw an old man daring to stand still. And nothing made him angrier than stillness he could not shake. Elias turned his cart slowly, the small wheels creaking faintly as he adjusted direction toward the front of the store. The label on the soup can still lingered in his mind, not because he hadn't decided, but because this entire exchange had become something heavier than sodium content. But before he could even take 2 steps forward, a set of polished black boots moved into his path and stopped. Colonel Nathan Korr stood squarely in front of him now, feet shoulder-width apart, hands behind his back in parade rest, the way academy men stood when they thought posture equaled power. I said I wasn't finished with you, Korr announced, voice just loud enough to draw the attention of a nearby cashier and a security specialist near the exit. You don't get to walk away from a direct order on this base. Elias looked up, his gaze steady. Colonel, I believe I've complied with every request you made. That wasn't a request, Korr snapped, voice rising. It was an order. You're loitering. You've interfered with aisle traffic, and you've created a disruption. You're being removed. Elias's expression didn't change, but something subtle happened. His posture straightened just slightly, like a man putting invisible armor back on. Not pride, not challenge, just presence. The kind of presence that didn't come from medals or speeches, the kind forged in moments where silence was survival. Behind Korr, a sergeant loading protein bars into a wire basket had stopped mid-shelf. He exchanged a glance with another airman nearby. Something about this felt off, wrong even, but no one moved. Not yet. Korr leaned closer. I don't know who you think you are, but I promise you, your generation doesn't intimidate mine. Elias tilted his head slightly. I don't intend to intimidate anyone, Colonel. Korr ignored the answer, waving over a nearby junior enlisted soldier. Airmen, get base security on the line. We've got a removal in progress. Civilian, non-compliant. That was when a voice cut through the tension. Not loud, not aggressive, just deep and precise, like a piano key struck in a quiet room. Colonel Korr, the voice said from the end of the aisle. May I have a word? Korr turned, irritation already forming behind his eyes, and paused. Approaching from the opposite end of the row was Sergeant Major Darren Voss, built like an oak tree in uniform. His walk was slow, deliberate, a man who had worn the stripes long enough to know that speaking too soon was often worse than not speaking at all. Sergeant Major, Korr said, trying to keep authority in his voice. This doesn't concern you. Voss's face was unreadable, but his tone never wavered. With respect, Colonel, it does now. He reached the pair calmly, eyes flicking once to Elias and then back to Korr. Something about the older man's bearing made him pause. Not in confusion, in recognition. There was a steadiness there that Voss had only seen in the rarest of men. I've been standing back for a few minutes, sir, Voss said, keeping his tone neutral. It seems like this is escalating fast over a very small issue. This man is obstructing an active duty facility, Korr replied. His ID's valid, but he's disruptive. I've ordered him to leave. Voss glanced again at Elias, who remained silent. Then back at Korr. He doesn't look disruptive to me. Looks like a man buying soup. Korr bristled. Are you questioning a direct command from a superior officer, Sergeant Major? No, sir, Voss said without blinking. I'm questioning whether this command is necessary. A breath passed between them, tension wrapped in ceremony. You're out of line, Sergeant Major. I'll accept that, Voss said. But I'd rather be out of line than stand quiet while a veteran is publicly humiliated over nothing. Korr stepped forward, his jaw tight. You think his service entitles him to ignore protocol? I think, Voss said slowly, his presence here deserves more than a scolding over canned food. The two men stared at each other for one long beat. And in that silence, Elias remained still, not passive, not absent, but watching, weighing. He had seen this dance before. Ego versus principle, noise versus wisdom. And he knew which one usually burned itself out first. But this time, something different was coming. Because down at the other end of the aisle, another figure had appeared. Tall, striding with purpose. The buzz of the base exchange seemed to shift around him. Every uniform in sight seemed to snap just a bit straighter. Brigadier General Marlin Trask had arrived, and everything was about to change. A hush spread across the aisle like the first ripple of wind before a storm breaks over still water. It wasn't a shout or a bang that did it. It was something quieter, the presence of authority that needed no announcement. Brigadier General Marlin Trask walked into aisle 9 with the kind of step that changed the air pressure in the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair more gray than black now. His uniform was plain compared to the decorations in his Pentagon portrait, but the weight of his presence made every enlisted man within view straighten instinctively. Even the airman by the frozen aisle seemed to freeze mid-step. Behind him trailed a lean, wide-eyed lieutenant holding a data tablet like it contained nuclear launch codes. He was trying to keep up without rushing. The general wasn't moving fast, but each step said, "This ends now." Colonel Korr spun at the movement and froze mid-breath. "General, sir, good afternoon," Korr began, straightening reflexively and offering a textbook salute. General Trask didn't return it, didn't even glance in his direction. His eyes were locked on Elias Murrin. For a second, just a second, something flickered across the general's face. Confusion? No. Recognition. Deep. Old. The kind that pulled from memory buried under decades of classified reports and half-forgotten photographs. He studied Elias the way a man might study a ghost and wonder if he was awake. Trask stepped past Korr entirely, walked up to the elderly man, and stopped with the stillness of a man arriving at a grave he thought lost. "Sir," the general said softly, voice devoid of rank, condescension, or theater, just quiet, professional respect. "May I ask your name?" Elias, still holding the card handle with both hands, tilted his chin up slightly. "Elias Murrin, sir. Ridgeborne Recon. 6 drop." The general blinked. Just once. It was the kind of blink that tried to swallow a flood. Silence deepened. Even the overhead store music seemed to fade. Behind him, the young lieutenant's fingers hovered nervously over his tablet, as if unsure whether to keep recording. Korr stepped forward, trying to speak. "Sir, with all due respect, this individual was refusing to." Trask raised one hand. No shout, no order. Just a single gesture that stopped Colonel Korr's sentence mid-vowel. "Ridgeborne," the general repeated under his breath, almost as if tasting the name. Before it even had a name. Elias nodded. Before it had a patch, even. The sergeant major nearby, Darren Voss, went still. His eyes widened just enough to reveal that he'd recognized something the moment 6 drop was mentioned. He glanced once at Korr, who was now rapidly losing control, not of the situation, but of reality itself. Trask spoke again, this time with a strange weight in his voice. "Sir, if I may ask, did you ever go by a call sign?" Elias hesitated for the first time in the entire encounter, not out of fear, but thought, as if that simple question, harmless to others, held something sacred within it. His eyes briefly closed, not long, just enough to glance backward through time, through snow, fire, shadows. When he opened them, he spoke 2 words. Shade 7. The effect was nuclear. Not loud, not explosive, but final. The aisle didn't erupt. It collapsed in a silence so heavy that the hum of the overhead fluorescents suddenly sounded like thunder. Behind Trask, the lieutenant's jaw slackened. The airman at the end of the row audibly whispered, "No way," before catching himself. Korr looked around, confused. He frowned, as if trying to do math without numbers. "What's Shade 7? Trask didn't answer. Not yet. He took a slow step back. His jaw had gone tight. His shoulders had squared, not in defensiveness, but reverence. He was staring not at an old man anymore, but at a ghost that wasn't supposed to exist. Every inch of his body said the same thing. This man wasn't supposed to be alive. And Colonel Nathan Korr, still clueless, had just tried to remove him over a can of soup. Shade 7, General Trask said it, as if speaking a prayer he never thought he'd hear aloud, like uttering the name might summon something from beneath the earth. His voice had changed. It wasn't the polished authority of a base commander anymore. It was reverent, wounded, as if he were in the presence of something holy and haunted. Sergeant Major Darren Voss inhaled sharply. The younger enlisted men nearby, all too young to know the stories by name, felt the pressure in the room shift like gravity had tilted. Shade 7. The name meant nothing to them, but everyone could feel it meant everything to someone like Trask. Colonel Korskanted. "What's a Shade 7? He asked, tone somewhere between irritation and bewilderment. No one answered. Trask finally looked away from Elias and turned his full attention to Korr. What followed was not yelling, not scolding, just silence, the kind that hung for too long, stretched taut between shame and revelation. When he finally did speak, the words came cold and measured. "Colonel." Trask said, his voice devoid of warmth. You have no idea what you've done. Korr bristled, but tried to salvage control. Sir, I follow protocol. He refused to leave when instructed, be silent. Those two words silenced Korr faster than any reprimand. The general stepped toward him, not rushed, not dramatic, but with the calm fury of a glacier. You're asking what Shade 7 is? Trask asked, eyes narrowing. Let me educate you, since you clearly skipped every history and ethics lesson the Academy ever offered. He turned slightly, addressing the aisle now. More shoppers had gathered, not out of curiosity anymore, but respect. The air felt sacred. Operation Emberjaw, Trask began. Winter of 71. Unofficial. Unacknowledged. Deep incursion beyond the Varnen Ridge. Soviet territory. Rumors of an anti-radar satellite uplink under construction. Untraceable. Deadly. He nodded toward Elias. A 5-man recon team was sent and under no flag. No uniforms. No records. Their mission was to gather intelligence, sabotage the uplink, and disappear before war was triggered. They never came back. The air grew heavier. Every syllable felt like it traveled back in time. For confirmed Kia by local intercepts. Only one body was never recovered, never accounted for. Officially, the 5th man died with them. Trask looked directly at Elias again. Unofficially, there were rumors, whispers, that someone survived, that he completed the mission, that he burned the uplink with his own hands and walked out of enemy territory across 80 miles of snow with a shattered femur, frostbite in both feet, and no weapon but a rusted blade. He paused. His voice dipped lower. Slower. The Soviets never spoke of it. But their maps changed. Korr swallowed hard. Sweat glistened at his hairline now. You mean to tell me? Trask ignored him and continued. That man was listed as Kia because even our side couldn't confirm his survival. No radio. No Viacon. No his feed. His Medal of Honor citation is sealed in a classified vault because even the paperwork is dangerous to disclose. Trask stepped aside, revealing Elias to the full line of witnesses. You didn't just insult a veteran, Colonel, he said, tone now sharp with cold steel. You attempted to publicly humiliate a ghost who was supposed to be legend. Gasps traveled through the crowd in uneven waves. A private near the end of the aisle was now standing stiffly, eyes locked straight ahead like he'd just been summoned to formation. An airman near the checkout counter whispered something under his breath, something like, they told us he was dead. Elias said nothing. He didn't glow. He didn't flex. He didn't correct or embellish. He just stood there, leaning lightly on the cart, hands still wrapped around the handle, like a man waiting for a bus. Not a god, not a warrior, just a man who had already fought more than anyone here could imagine, and had nothing left to prove. Colonel Korr's jaw hung open. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed to realize he wasn't the tallest figure in the room. He wasn't even close. His voice came out cracked. Sir, I didn't know. Trask didn't blink. You didn't ask. And that, more than anything, was the lesson now branded across the walls of Fort Varnen Base Exchange. The man in the faded cap was not some relic cluttering up the aisle. He was the reason every man in that building was still standing. Shade 7, General Trask whispered it again, almost to himself now, not to impress the room, not to explain, just to believe it. The name had echoed in classified debriefs, in training halls where instructors told stories no one could prove, in footnotes sealed behind black ink and redacted files. And now that name stood in aisle 9 of the Fort Varnen Base Exchange, holding a shopping cart. I need confirmation, Trask muttered, turning slightly to his aide. The young lieutenant, who looked like he hadn't blinked in minutes, tapped his tablet nervously, fingers fumbling against the screen. Trask didn't wait for the result. His eyes never left Elias. Sergeant Major Darren Voss took a slow, involuntary step forward. Sir, he said to the general, I know this is above my clearance, but Shade 7? That was Hellwinter Recon, wasn't it? Trask nodded once. Voss's eyes widened in disbelief. But, sir, Hellwinter was never confirmed. The whole op is still buried in Joint SpecCom archives under 4-latch lock. And it'll stay buried, Trask said, voice clipped. But every instructor worth their salt still tells it. Not with names. Just the story. Korr swallowed again. He'd heard whispers in briefings, wild tales about a black recon op gone off-grid behind the Vorn Ridge. Impossible distance. A team lost in freezing terrain. But those were legends, not lunch-hour reality. "You're saying he's the one?" he asked, pointing, his finger trembling. Elias looked over slowly, his expression unreadable. "It wasn't a solo mission," he said simply. "It was supposed to be 5 of us." A heavy pause settled over them. The air felt tighter, thinner. Every enlisted man and junior officer watching had gone silent, no longer bystander, but witness. Trask's voice softened. "They taught us that Shade 7 was a myth to motivate us, not a man." Elias didn't smile. "That's fine. Most myths are just things people stopped asking questions about." It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. The kind of truth only a man with frostbitten toes and blood in his mouth and ice in his beard could say without flinching. "Sir," the lieutenant finally broke in, eyes wide with confirmation from his screen, cross-check complete. He's listed Kia under SEAL, Tier Bravo clearance. Last confirmed signature from the Vorin Echo Range. March 4th, 1971. No body recovered. No exfil code entered. "Sir, his Medal of Honor citation is sealed under black tag designation." Trask let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Black tag designation meant one thing: deniable miracle. "Do you know what that means, Colonel?" Trask asked, turning to Korr. "It means the only reason you're alive enough to disrespect this man today is because the world never learned how close it came to tipping over." Korr had no answer. None would have sufficed. He was watching the bones of his confidence crack and collapse in real time. And it wasn't the general's words that shattered him. It was the look in Elias Murren's eyes. Steady, patient, pitying, like a man who had seen monsters Korr couldn't imagine and didn't need to describe them to win. "Sir," Korr said weakly. "If I'd known—" "We didn't need to know," Trask said. "You just needed to act like a man who respected what came before him." That was the line. The one that rang louder than anything shouted in that store. Respect for what came before. Because the truth about Elias Murren wasn't that he was a legend. It was that he never asked to be one. General Trask turned fully toward Elias now, as if the rest of the aisle, the onlookers, the frozen colonel, the blinking registers, the overhead lights, had all fallen away. His voice was quieter this time, yet firmer. A different kind of command. "Sir, I cannot express how deeply I regret what you've been subjected to in this building." The use of "sir" was not just formal, it was historic. Spoken from one warrior to another, across a divide not of rank but of reverence. Trask stood tall, but there was humility in his posture now, the kind that can only be shown when a soldier realizes the myth he studied in his youth now stands before him. Not as a statue, but as a tired man holding a half-empty shopping cart. Elias didn't speak. He simply looked at Trask and nodded once, as if to say, "You're not the problem." Behind the general, the young lieutenant had unconsciously begun to stand straighter. The airman near the frozen goods had stopped breathing with his mouth open, now holding his hands behind his back as if at formation. The cashier didn't even scan the next item in line. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. General Trask continued, addressing Elias with the slow precision of a formal address. "You are a guest of honor on this base. As long as I am the commanding officer here, you will never wait in line. You will never be questioned for walking these halls. And you will never again be asked for identification at a door you helped secure before half of us were even born." The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Then Trask did something no one expected. He took a step forward and saluted, not the casual, polite tip of fingers that senior officers reserve for retirees. This was a full, rigid, square-shouldered salute. A salute given at funerals, at flag ceremonies, at medals passed from trembling hands to folded flags. And Elias, moved but not rattled, stood still for a beat, then returned the salute. Slower, deeper, as if it came from somewhere buried under 50 winters of silence. Sergeant Major Voss stepped forward as well. He didn't speak, but his salute followed, swift and clean. Then the young lieutenant, then the airman, then the sailor behind the aisle. One by one, uniformed men and women raised their hands not to a commanding officer, but to the man who had once vanished so that others might live. Colonel Nathan Korr, however, remained frozen. His hands hung at his sides like dead weight. His face was drained of color. The medals on his chest felt like they didn't belong to him anymore. He stared at the ripple he had caused, a ripple that had turned into an ocean crashing down over his career. And yet Elias didn't look at him with bitterness. No vengeance, no smagnis, just that same quiet neutrality that had baffled Korr from the start. But now, it wasn't infuriating. It was devastating. Trask broke the formation first, lowering his salute. His voice, though quiet, rang through the aisle again. "If it pleases you, Mr. Murren, I would like to personally escort you to the command lounge. We have hot coffee, a fireplace, and fewer people with something to prove." Elias's smile was faint, not triumphant, just tired. "Koffie sounds fine." Trask turned slightly. "Sergeant Major Voss, see to it that he gets whatever he needs. A fresh meal, transport, a medical pass if he's due for anything. Full access." "Yes, sir," Voss replied, his voice tight with respect. As Elias turned his cart to follow, every pair of eyes followed him. Not as an old man with a shopping list, but as a legend who'd walked back into history wearing jeans and a ball cap. And in the corner of that reverent silence, Korr stood utterly forgotten. He'd walked into aisle 9 a colonel, but he would leave it something far less. Colonel Nathan Korr remained where he stood, feet locked to the tile floor, lips parted, but no words coming. The medals on his chest, once gleaming with self-satisfaction, now felt like hollow ornaments, badges pinned over ignorance. Around him, the base exchange had transformed. No longer a simple commissary, Aisle 9 had become a courtroom, a living tribunal. And in the silence left by Elias Murren's departure, the only verdict remaining was his. General Trask didn't move right away. He watched Elias's slow walk down the aisle with Voss at his side, a quiet procession, not of ceremony, but of dignity. Only after Elias and the sergeant major rounded the corner did Trask turn fully toward Korr. When he spoke, his voice was almost too calm. "Colonel Korr, you are hereby relieved of command." The words were so plain, they cut deeper than if he'd shouted. Korr blinked. "Sir, you will not speak," Trask said, his tone like frozen steel. "Not until I'm finished." A few junior personnel nearby stiffened. No one dared move. "You failed today, Colonel," Trask continued, stepping closer. "Not tactically, not administratively, but morally. And that, Colonel, is the first failure that disqualifies a man from leadership." Korr's jaw clenched. His hands twitched slightly at his sides. "General, if I may explain," Trask leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You had a chance to lead. Instead, you chose to belittle. You saw age and dismissed it. You saw humility and mistook it for weakness. And worst of all, you didn't listen. You never asked who he was. You never cared." Korr's shoulders dropped half an inch. That one landed. "You humiliated a man whose name is carved into mission briefings that are still under lock and key in the Capitol's vaults. A man who operated beyond flag and country. A man whose service is spoken about in whispers because it's too dangerous to document in public. And you reduced him to an inconvenience." "I didn't know," Korr said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I didn't know." "That's not the problem," Trask said. "The problem is that you didn't think it was worth knowing." He pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket and tore a page with slow deliberation, handing it to his aide without even glancing. "Escort Colonel Korr to ethics oversight. Effective immediately, he is suspended from active command pending a full inquiry into his conduct." "Yes, sir," the aide said quietly, already tapping the command into his device. Korr looked around now, at the frozen shoppers, the saluting airmen, the cashier who had yet to resume scanning. The atmosphere had changed permanently. He saw their eyes. None held outrage. None held hatred. Just disappointment. The kind you don't forget. "You'll be reassigned," Trask added. "Pending review, You'll spend the next year at the Historical Division in DC Archive rotation. Basement level. Korr blinked, confused. Archives, sir. You will process after-action reports. You will catalog the names of men you never care to understand. You will study what leadership really looks like in black and white, in dusty folders, in the inked blood of forgotten heroes. Korr's mouth opened again, but he had no words. You want redemption? Trask said, stepping in one last time. Start by learning the names of the men who made your rank possible. Until then, he pointed toward the door. Korr turned slowly. No escort needed. No hand on the shoulder. Just gravity dragging him out of the aisle that had buried his career. And as he walked away, for the first time in years, Nathan Korr felt the full weight of the uniform he wore. Not as privilege, but as debt. The hallway that led from the base exchange to the command wing was nothing special. Beige tile floors, fluorescent lights overhead, decades-old framed photos of past commanders lining the walls. But today, with each step Elias Murren took, it might as well have been a red carpet. Not for ceremony, but for witness. He walked slowly, the way old men do, not from fragility, but from deliberation. At his side, General Marlin Trask matched his pace, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Behind them trailed Sergeant Major Darren Voss, carrying nothing but a deepening reverence. They passed a young corporal who froze in place and saluted, eyes wide. Elias didn't salute back. He simply nodded, the kind of nod soldiers never forget. I never imagined you were still alive, Trask said softly as they turned a corner, his voice hushed like they were walking through a cathedral. I studied you. Not by name, of course. Just the files. The mission logs. The gaps. Most of my life has been gaps, Elias murmured. The kind you don't fill in with words. Trask looked over at him. I read about the Varnen range. The hike out. The frostbite. The injuries. They said you crawled the last 2 miles to the Turkish border. Elias didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to confirm or deny. I remember the cold, he said. More than the pain. Pain ends. Cold stays with you. You dream in it. Voss, trailing behind them, stayed silent. He wasn't supposed to be hearing this. But he also knew that this wasn't classified anymore. It was sacred. Elias wasn't revealing secrets. He was revealing scars. I read that you destroyed the uplink by hand, Trask added. No C4 left. No team left. Just a crowbar and a bottle of thermite. Elias chuckled once. It wasn't humor. It was memory. Dry and distant. Wasn't a crowbar, he said. Was a rusted rail pin. Broke my own thumb swinging it. They passed a lieutenant in the hall who stood at attention, eyes tracking Elias as if a ghost had just walked through the frame of a photo he'd only seen in training slides. Trask slowed slightly, lowering his voice even more. They told us you never came back, that the mission was a success, but that the price was total. We memorized your story without knowing your name. They called you the unknown phantom during recon prep. Elias stopped, turned slightly. Good, he said. That means the story mattered more than the man. That landed harder than Trask expected. He stopped beside him, not out of duty, but because something in those words pierced deeper than years of briefings ever could. Sir, Trask said quietly, what you did, no medal, no plaque, no speech, it changed everything. It shifted the entire Cold War timeline. But there's nothing about you in the public records. Elias looked at him calm. That's because I asked them not to. Trask blinked. You asked? Elias turned back down the hallway and began walking again. A team died for that mission. For good men. I lived. That wasn't the plan. They deserved medals. Statues. I deserved silence. And in that moment, Trask understood. Some men don't carry medals on their chests. They carry them in their bones. As they approached the command lounge, Voss stepped ahead to open the door. Sir, he said, voice softer than before, we've got hot coffee, heated seats, and if you'll allow me, the strongest handshake I've ever given. Elias paused, looked at him, and for the first time that day, a real smile. Not pride, not relief, just warmth. I'll take that handshake, he said. And as they stepped through the door, the base behind them exhaled, carrying with it a story the archives never told, but that every man in uniform would remember for the rest of their lives. The command lounge doors closed quietly behind Elias Murren as he stepped inside. A soft warmth filled the room, not just from the fireplace glowing in the far corner, but from the atmosphere itself. Leather chairs, old war maps framed in brass. A portrait of General Vance hung over the hearth, his stern gaze forever frozen in oil paint. But today, the room belonged to someone else entirely. General Trask stood just behind Elias, then stepped around to face him. The two men, divided by decades, now stood eye to eye, no longer as commander and guest, but as soldier to soldier. Darren Voss remained by the door, his posture ramrod straight, but his expression softened with a quiet reverence. "You never asked to be remembered, did you?" Trask said, pouring a cup of black coffee from the silver carafe near the wall. Elias slowly settled into the wide leather chair. "No, but that's not the same as wanting to be forgotten." Trask nodded, handed him the mug, and sat across from him. The fireplace crackled quietly between them, not roaring, just alive. Like the man in front of him. "You know," Trask said, eyes still locked on Elias, "in every leadership course, we're told that honor is something you earn through sacrifice. What they don't tell you is that some men sacrifice so much, there's no honor left big enough to hold it." Elias said nothing at first. He simply sipped the coffee, slow, deliberate, grateful. Then he looked up. "That's because honor was never meant to be held," he said. "It's meant to be passed on." The room went still. Trask blinked once. Voss, at the door, visibly swallowed. Outside the lounge, the base was returning to motion. Orders were being issued, supplies being checked, engines humming. But something invisible had changed. A story had broken through the walls, not through shouts or screens, but through a single man in a worn hat who had asked nothing and taught everything. Moments later, the doors opened again. Colonel Nathan Korr stood in the doorway, flanked by two aides from ethics oversight. His posture was slumped, but his face changed. Paler, humbled. He looked not like a man being sentenced, but like one just beginning to understand what he'd never known. He stepped forward slowly, hat in hand. "I came to apologize," he said, voice quieter than it had ever been. Elias didn't look away. He didn't glare. He didn't wave the man off. He simply looked into Korr's eyes the way a man looks into his own reflection after too long in the dark. "You thought I was wasting your time," Elias said, not accusingly, just truthfully. "But time is the only reason I'm still alive." Korr's lips parted as if to respond, but the words weren't ready. Instead, he just nodded. A single, rigid nod. Then he stepped back. He would have years to process that line, and he would never forget it. Trask leaned forward. "You called him just a boy earlier." Elias nodded slowly. "He is. He'll learn. We all did." And with that, Elias stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, just with the weight of someone who had stood up from worse places. Trask offered his hand again. This time, Elias took it with full strength. "Thank you for not walking away," Trask said. Elias gave a slight smile. "That's the one thing I was trained never to do." And then he left. No escort, no applause, just footsteps fading down the hallway, a slow, steady echo behind them. By evening, every mess hall on base had heard the story. By morning, instructors at the training academy had rewritten their lessons to include a nameless old man who bought soup and left legends in his wake. And by week's end, a new brass plaque appeared above aisle 9 in the base exchange, small, subtle, mounted beside the canned goods. In honor of those whose names were buried with valor and who never stopped teaching, even in silence. No name was listed, none needed. The story now lived in every soldier who passed by that aisle and stood just a little straighter. Forever.